Rachel Kyte, Keir Starmer told delegates last week that consensus is gone on the 1.5 degree target. Brazil's COP president says rich countries have lost their enthusiasm. If that's the case, COP's dead in the water, isn't it?
No. I think Keir Starmer was talking to the fraying consensus in the UK amongst political leaders. I think most British people want affordable electricity, they want clean water, clean air. And so I'm not sure that the public consensus has gone anywhere. Globally, 194 countries are here. The US is walking away. 195 minus 1 is 194, not 0. And I think what President Lula was talking about is the fact that he's called this the truth COP. So this is the COP where we come and we say, okay, after 10 years, we aren't where we need to be. We've really got to, as Xi Jinping said, strive to do better. And so we're all gathered here trying to work out which bits of these transitions we know are working and we need to double down on to go faster. So, format of the COP, we can argue about whether this was designed to negotiate, not designed to accelerate implementation. But the fact that we need to be pressing forward is as real as ever.
You're obviously right to draw the sort of comparison between a singular nation like the United States and the others that are attending COP. But the United States is a big country. It's a big polluter. It's a big emitter. And their absence from this summit, it is relevant, isn't it?
No, it's relevant because, it's one planet. We all live on it. We can't afford to have a very big economy sort of go off the cliff, as it were. Their abandoning of their targets, if that's what they're going to do, will mean a sizable reduction in what could be achieved if everybody was on the same page. And the people who are going to suffer the most, in the short to medium term are actually going to be, despite the stock market, citizens of the United States, because they're going to see energy price inflation. They already are. And we are past the tipping point in terms of the energy transition. We are most of the investment is now going into renewable energy, and the US was really in the forefront. And we see China and other countries trying to become effective electrostates, right, not petrostates. So I think there's bemusement, puzzlement, baffled sort of looks, because this isn't good for the US economy, but that's for them to decide. Meanwhile, there's lots happening here. And the further east and south you go from the eastern seaboard of the United States, I think you see extraordinary progress. The big issue here is actually adaptation and resilience. So given the size of the impacts on the economy of continued extreme weather events, so we've seen Melissa in Jamaica just last week, the Philippines is going through another bone-crushing typhoon in the last 48 hours. How do we pay for this? How do we help countries build their resilience so that the impacts are less? That's a big, big discussion here.
Rachel, could you give us a sense of the bilateral efforts from the United Kingdom towards America on this? Because in other areas of foreign policy, Ukraine is probably the one that most jumps to our mind. The UK has actually played probably an outsized role diplomatically in bringing the US into the tent. You might be able to look at, for example, tariffs, economic deals being struck on steel, things of that nature, and a lot gets made actually of Starmer and Trump's personal relationship in navigating those matters. Can you give us a sense of the bilateral efforts that the UK is conducting with the United States, specifically when it comes to climate?
So I think we have a very deep and broad technical cooperation on issues of energy. And I think we agree on some of, we certainly know what our priorities are. We agree with the United States on some of their priorities. The United States is now taking all of the above approach to energy sources and putting a greater emphasis on fossil fuels. That's, at odds a little bit with our own domestic strategy. So we're allies. We agree to disagree in some areas, and then we're technically cooperating in a very fluid way on other areas. And I think that's the nature of a relationship. It waxes and wanes. So lots of cooperation still going on. And then, I think a disagreement about what's best for the UK on some aspects of the energy mix.
Could we talk in sort of broader strokes here about, if I was to try and be reductive and say it in a sentence, cheaper energy versus cleaner energy? There's increasingly arguments being made now, particularly in the UK, actually, about net zero by 2050, people looking towards recent European elections and wondering if there's some inspiration, that's the word I'm looking for, to be drawn from what happened in the Netherlands, for example. To talk about Brazil, they've asked for money to help protect the Amazon, protect their rainforests. People saying, oh no, we can't help, we don't have the budgets. Everywhere it seems pressing economic concerns are overriding climate aims. How should the UK try to square that circle? What's our role in bridging those two things?
So the cheaper energy versus cleaner energy construct is a false dichotomy. The cheapest energy is different blends of renewable energy and storage, and depending on where you are in the world and what your energy mix is. The question is, how do you regulate your energy, your power sector, your energy sector, so that the consumer feels the benefit of that clean energy? And that's where I think we have things to do. Many countries have things to do, because the regulation of our power sector was designed, in most cases, in most developed countries' cases, decades ago, for a centralized fossil fuel power grid, and that's no longer relevant, right? So most of the technical conversations that I'm part of with countries around the world are about how we reform our power sectors and reform the regulation, et cetera, so that the consumer, industrial or residential, feels the benefit of the cheap power that comes from renewable energy. So we've, and then I think there's a question of narrative, where some have jumped on the idea that the sort of lag in regulating in that way has meant that it's true that renewable energy is going to bankrupt the country. Absolute nonsense. And then we see the vast majority of investment globally going into renewable energy now. Now, China is indicating that it's peaking in terms of fossil fuels. There is investment going into fossil fuels, but it's outweighing. So we're in a transition, and we have to hold two things in our minds at the same time. I think the real challenge here is the process of electrification that comes off the back of renewable energy. So most of the investment in renewable energy is going into developed countries. The growth in the global economy is coming from middle income and developing countries. So they have to grow green, and they want to. So what the big conversations here are, why are you not investing in our green transition more? So that's grids, interconnectors, transformers. And then the private sector is ready to invest in energy generation, renewable energy generation in most countries in the world now. That's a big change from 5 years ago. On the question, so while we try to move our energy transition away from carbonized fuels, then we also have to protect the tropical rainforest, because that's our sink, it's our resilience. If we lose that, then your basket of food and coffee and chocolate and things like that the price is just going to go up and up and up. So there's a direct relationship between protecting the tropical forests and the food security, energy security of the British people. And what I think the fact that we are now building a global fund to invest in those forests rather than just hand out grants is actually a big pivot. And the UK can't invest right now just because of the timing of the budget, but we've helped for the last 2 years to build this fund, and we will at some point be involved in it. And I think in the conversations between President Lula and Keir Starmer, that was clear.
Can the UK hit net zero by 2050?
Yes.
Will we?
That depends on who we elect into government and whether we can keep our eye on the prize. Every country around the world, I think, is facing the short-termism of politics versus the long-term enterprise of a generational shift in the lifeblood of our economies, away from fossil fuels to electricity, and then all the industries that can be built off that. And I think the really significant challenge is that the impacts of climate change have come early. Some of the things that we're experiencing now, we originally thought were going to happen in the late 2030s and maybe the early 2040s, and they're happening now. And we have to be able to protect people, and we have to be able to build our lives in a way that is more resilient. I mean, look at the extraordinary costs to build back for Jamaica. We've for 20 years been saying that the cost of inaction is more than the cost of action. And officials and political leaders around the world just parrot this. And we have not made the difficult decisions that would actually realize that. And so the public, I think, know, because, you sit in your garden and you can see that the seasons have changed. You know that coffee has got more expensive. You might not know why, but let me tell you, that's because of weather pattern changes in key coffee producing countries. And so there's an honesty in the dialogue that we're going to need if we reach net zero by 2050.
I'd like to pick up on that point, actually, Rachel. Emissions at record highs, wildfires in Brazil, flooding in Valencia. You mentioned Melissa, you've mentioned the Philippines. There are increasingly extreme, but also increasingly frequent severe weather events. What's your perspective on investment into resilience? In the UK, that might look like flood defences.
Yeah.
But I often wonder, there's this gap, right, between stated aims and revealed preferences in the way that we spend. Because the point you're making is one, I really broadly agree with, which is that to use the UK as an example, we know what the consequences of this are going to be: more flooding, right? So,
and more extreme heat.
Where is that money coming from?
So I think this is the crux of the matter, and actually, this is one thing which has been really exciting over the last year. Actually, is a sort of a platform for a dialogue, a constant dialogue between the City of London, the Treasury, and the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office around how we work together. So the signals that regulators, the Treasury can send, and what the investors are doing. So, for example, many companies are already having to invest in the resilience of their physical plant, their operations, in order to operate in a world where you've got extreme heat events, where you've got more floods, etc. That's marked down as a cost to them, right? In fact, we need them to do that. That's an investment in a more resilient future. So how could you reward companies for doing that? And then you'd see more investment flowing in. So there's going to be events today on lethal humidity. There's a group in Australia that calls extreme heat lethal humidity. It's brilliant, because that's exactly what it is. It is the nighttime temperatures which are now staying higher for longer, and the wet bulb number that is killing people and making life, very difficult and damaging agricultural productivity and things like this. So calling it what it is and then working out what to do about it. And you will see extraordinary examples last week in Rio, where all the cities were gathered, and then here in Belém, of cities and companies using low-tech, mid-tech, high-tech to make cities more livable in these extreme heat. So everybody is adapting. At the moment, we're just not recognizing it, incentivizing it. And these are macroeconomic and fiscal tools, and we've just got to get smarter about it. And of course, the Climate Change Committee recently reported back to the government on what this was going to mean for the UK. And then a final point I want to make is the insurance industry. So insurance transfers the risk. It doesn't take the risk away. So, for example, for Jamaica and for other countries like it, we have something called parametric insurance. So if a big storm comes, then it will trigger payments immediately, and those can be used to start to rebuild, right? But in fact, we're seeing such severe impacts across the world, all across the United States, across every region, right? The insurance industry is starting to pull back because we're beginning to be uninsurable. And so one of the things that I hope that the UK and others will lead over the next period is a conversation about what do we do in a world where our insurance industry, not individual products or individual companies, but the industry, the way we regulate insurance is not fit for the future, a future where climate impacts are as bad as they are. Now, if we can fix that, we can keep more people insured, more assets insured, and we'll be able to build more resilience that way.
And the UN says the new climate plans are of a higher quality than previous ones. What can we expect to be revealed at this conference?
Well, so the plans, this is the third generation of national plans that countries are coming forward with. And they are now all economy, right? So it's not just the power sector or, heavy industry, it's everything. And they are all gases. So it's not just carbon dioxide, but it's methane and other short-lived climate pollutants, etc. And China, for example, has now come forward with its plan, which includes methane, which is really, really important. So if they're all economy, all gases, so then we can start working out, well, where do we invest in these countries? And how do these countries invest in themselves to speed up the transition? But when you add them all up, they don't add up to a global pathway to 1.5 degrees. And so again, this is really about saying, okay, well, this is where we are, but this is where we need to be. And so from Belém forward, where are the inflection points in our economies where we need to be putting pressure to be able to go faster? And that means that there's lots of conversations here about industrial hubs, about using hydrogen for industrial clusters. There's all kinds of things about transportation. There's all kinds of things about, using green procurement so that governments and public services are only buying green buses and things like this. And this is the world over. And the innovation is coming from middle income countries. The innovation and the finance is increasingly coming from Asia. And people look to London as the center of green bonds, the center of blue bonds, the place where people want to list if they've got a growing green tech, clean tech company. And so actually, part of the leadership that Keir Starmer was talking about is actually the leadership of our financial and insurance sectors and the City of London. And so, let's see how much we can get done in the next 2 weeks. We don't have any time to lose.
Just a word on those inflection points in the British economy. Mm-hmm. What are those industries that you believe, pressure does need to be exerted upon within our economy? Well,
I think that the leadership of Ed Miliband in terms of getting the energy sector fit for purpose and building out the renewable energy and the battery storage, and then being able to have reliable, affordable, clean energy for reindustrialization, that's in place. And I think that's going forward. What we need to do now is have both industries and households see the benefits of that. And that's translated into, prices in the electricity bill. And then I think where it really makes a difference is when you start to feel the electrification, what electrification is doing to your life, making it easier and smoother and cheaper. And that will come through continued build out on transportation, continued build out on being able to move to cheaper heating, improvement in the way in which your housing is working. So these are big issues for a country that has such an old and inefficient housing stock, which is, the fault of 30 years of government that didn't really deal with it. So this is hard stuff, but I think that I was just at a big conference in Asia where everybody's talking about the extraordinary opportunities in investing in Britain because Britain has made a commitment and isn't wavering from it because of the Climate Change Committee. So we can have politicians bloviate about whether net zero is bankrupting or not, but other countries are looking at us as an investable opportunity because we've got a statutory commitment and we've got a smooth track forward.